I, Olusegun Obasanjo,
do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and that I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So help me God.
On May 29, 1999, the occasion that many in Africa and beyond feared they might never see began on what the master of ceremonies boomingly described as a sprightly and God-blessed morning. Thousands of people gathered under a blistering equatorial sun to witness the inauguration of Olusegun Aremu Okikiola Obasanjo, their first civilian president in 16 years, and to see the generals who had led Nigeria to the brink of disaster relinquish their power. For a moment, it was possible to believe that Nigeria was finally taking a momentous stride towards a better future, where it hopefully would go the rest of Africa. The ceremony took place in the Eagle Square Stadium, especially built for the occasion in the heart of Abuja, the ultra-modern capital of glittering hotels and office towers. Huge columns of airmen, sailors and soldiers and a troop of school children took turns marching back and forth in fine British parade ground tradition. Outside the complex, behind a wire fence 12 feet tall, throngs of ordinary citizens milled about, drinking, eating, dancing and gawking at convoys of Mercedes sedans ferrying 24 heads of state, foreign dignitaries, parliamentarians and traditional monarchs. After years of diplomatic isolation as the sick man of Africa, Nigeria was basking in the glow of international attention, and this time for all the right reasons.
We have a mixed, reaction, mixed expectation, okay? Uncertainty, because we did not know how it would be. Then at the same time, hopeful. We are hopeful that it will be, a new era. So it was a mixed bag of feelings, mixed bag of expectation.
Having had a very long period of military rule and the various crises that happened, especially the June 12 crisis, it was exciting. Although I was young then, but I could feel the pulses of our people at that time.
The seed of the 1999 democratic inauguration was sown on June 12, 1993. This was the day Nigerians rose in unity, in amity, in concord and tandem to elect Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola. June 12, 1993 presidential election was symbolic in many ways. First, it was regarded as the most peaceful election ever held in Nigeria since independence. Second, Chief Abiola and his deputy, Babagana Kingibe, are both Muslims. Third, it was regarded as the freest and fairest election in Nigeria till date. Fourth, the election was celebrated and extolled by local, national and international observers. Fifth, for the first time in the history of Nigeria, the citizens jettisoned both ethnic and primordial sentiments to elect leaders of their choice. Sixth, there was no record of violence, intimidation, snatching of ballot boxes, multiple voting, and rigging. Shedding more light on this, Professor Abimbola Adesoji, a professor of history at Obafemi Awolowo University, explains.
Of course, we must also forget the fact that the method that was used for election also contributed. You know, it was in the process of manipulating the process that it came about the idea of option A4. And it was option A4 that now worked perfectly. How did option A4 work? You just, symbols of parties will be put and you queue behind the candidate of your choice. And once you queue, the tally is taken, people are counted, and the results are recorded. And so these are results that are transmitted from polling booth to area to constituent, then to other levels. And these are the results that are collected. So it happened that the system that he thought was going to truncate the program eventually aided it, such that it became so transparent, and whoever won is seen to have won fair and square.
My own guess, as an active participant in the process, would be that the election was fair and considered the fairest by many people for a number of reasons. Number one, it was the military that was conducting the election. None of those organizing the election was a beneficiary of the process. So there was objectivity on the part of the referee. That's number one. Number two, the method adopted. You queued behind the representative of your candidate, and people were counted. And when, in fact, we later adopted the open secret, you were all queued up, voted, stayed there, and the votes were counted in the presence of everybody, the result declared, and that was it. So the method itself commanded transparency. And thirdly, I think many political activists were not certain whether the military really wanted to go and hand over. So they did not participate. Those who were desperate for power, who would do any and everything to get power, many of them were not involved. So I think these are some of the reasons why the election has been adjudged perhaps the fairest in our history. These are my own suggestions.
Consequent upon the annulment, Nigeria's structure changed politically, socially, and economically. On Wednesday, June 24, 1993, the federal military government, through a short, undated, and unsigned statement, announced the termination of the entire transition process. The real factor that led to the annulment remains a mystery till today. General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida himself offered the country no clear explanation. Although he had been involved in political and military activities that have had far-reaching effect on Nigeria's political development, it was not until that Black Friday of February 13, 1976, that General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida fully unraveled and hit the nation's consciousness. Colonel Bukar Suka Dimka, his close friend, had staged a coup and had assassinated the then head of state, General Murtala Ramat Mohammed, at Ikoyi, Lagos at about 8:30 a.m. while he was on his way to the office. After the gruesome murder that shook Nigeria and Africa, Dimka and his gang had stormed the premises of Radio Nigeria, also in Ikoyi, to make a school broadcast. He was on it when Babangida, then a colonel, invaded the station and convinced his friend to give up the game. Babangida prevented the coup leader from making further broadcast, and the coup was effectively aborted. Since then, Babangida has been a recurring decimal point in Nigeria's political circuit. Born on 17th August 1941 in Minna to the family of Mohammed Babangida and Aisha Babangida, IBB joined the Nigerian Army on the 10th of December 1962 when he attended the Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna. Babangida received his commission as a second lieutenant as a regular combatant officer in the Royal Nigerian Army a month before it became the Nigerian Army, with a personnel army number N438 from the Indian Military Academy on the 26th September 1963. Babangida furthered his army training from January 1966 until April 1966 by enrolling in course 38 of the Young Officers course in the United Kingdom, where he received a 4-month course in saladin and gunnery. From August 1972 to June 1973, he took the Advanced Armor Officers course at Armored School. He attended the Senior Officers course, Armed Forces Command at Staff College, Georgia, from January 1977 until July 1977, and the Senior International Defense Management course, Naval Postgraduate School in the United States of America in 1980. He was second lieutenant in 1963, lieutenant in 1966, captain in 1968, major in 1970, lieutenant colonel in 1970, colonel in 1973, brigadier general in 1983, and general in 1987. Babangida also served as a member of the Supreme Military Council from August 1st, 1975 to October 1st, 1979. From January 1st, 1984 to August 27th, 1985, Babangida was the Chief of Army Staff and a member of the Supreme Military Council under the military regime of Major General Muhammadu Buhari. Babangida will later overthrow Buhari's regime on the 27th August 1985 in a military coup that relied on a mid-level officers that Babangida had strategically positioned over the years. With the benefit of insight, the Babangida transition politics were designed from the start to fail or, at the least, deliver Alhaji Ibrahim Babangida as civilian president. It will still be considered a failure in this situation because it did not transit anywhere. The initiative is still the country's longest, most intricate, most deceptive, and most costly change in its turbulent history. According to some observers, it is the continent's longest and most expensive shift. This assertion, however, cannot be proven in the absence of continental data on transitions. Because of the program's length and manipulations, Nigerians accuse Babangida of having a hidden agenda early in the day, which he vehemently denied but later proved to be true.
The time the Babangida-led government said he was introducing the transition to civil rule program, the first thing that he did was to set up a political bureau to fashion out an arrangement, because he said he wanted a new political order to evolve. So, and even in the report given by the political bureau, the Armed Forces Ruling Council, under the direction of Babangida, decided to adopt the minority report. The majority report recommended that the civil rule program should terminate by 1990, whereas the minority report stated otherwise, that the program should terminate by 1992. So he decided to opt for 1992. And to the discerning mind, that was the beginning of an attempt to keep on prolonging the transition to civil rule program. And one was to discover that a number of booby traps were built into the transition to civil rule program, and many others were introduced along the line into the project, such that the program just kept on being extended from initial first quarter of 1992 when it was supposed to terminate to the end of 1992 and eventually to August 27, 1993. That is just one part of it. The other part of it is the fact that the military was in power for so long. By 1993, when the military was supposed to terminate, the military would have spent 10 years in power. And apparently taking a cue from what happened in the period before the Second Republic, when the military was in power for about 13 years. Babangida must have thought that, well, we can also do some manipulations to remain in power for some time. So the military, what I'm saying in essence is that the military was not willing to relinquish power just like that. And that played out in the period before the June 12, 1993 election, and thereafter, the setting up of interim national government and the coming back of General Sani Abacha.
The detailed program began in 1986 and was scheduled to end in 1990, but it was later pushed back to 1992 and then to 1993. The ban on party politics was lifted on the 3rd of May 1989, paving the way for people to form political associations that will apply to the National Electoral Commission for registration. Since the government had already decided on a two-party structure for the country, politicians were aware that scaling the hurdle will be such a onerous task, but they decided to try. To determine the two parties, NEC imposed very stringent, expensive and almost impossible conditions. The parties were expected to establish well-equipped offices with at least 3 paid staff in all the then 435 local government areas in the country. They were to supply 25 membership lists of their parties, comprising the names, photographs and personal details of at least 200 members from each local government area in the country to NEC with a registration fee of 50,000 naira. All this must be done within 3 months. These apparent impossible conditions were put in place to make sure that none of the parties qualified for registration. Since Nigerian politicians have a never-say-die spirit, 13 political groups were able to submit their applications before the deadline. The Babangida drama of the absurd began in earnest. In a broadcast to the nation on the 6th of October 1989, Babangida said that all the parties had failed to comply with key conditions in the guidelines such as documentation on members, declaration of assets and liabilities of individual members of the National Executive Committees. Most of them had operated on the ground prior to the lifting of the ban on politics on the 3rd of May 1989 and had roots in the party politics of the First and Second Republics. There were very strong indications of wealthy individuals in the executive committees of the association that confirmed fears that were being hijacked by money bags. Based on the above, all the 13 associations were denied registration. Instead, the military decided to form 2 parties, the Social Democratic Party, SDP, and the National Republican Convention, NRC. The first leaning a little to the left and the other a little to the right. According to the government, all members will now be equal founders of either parties and that no one except government, which is neutral, sponsors the 2 parties. Many discerning Nigerians saw through the farce and raised their voices against this abuse of the philosophy of political parties, a clear negation of what political parties stood for.
And so when the nod was given that political associations should be formed, about 13 political associations applied to government for registration. And NEC, sorry, I'm missing the two together. NEC, now it was NEC under Babangida, we now have INEC. So at the end of the day, 13 political associations applied for registration. And NEC said it did not find any of them to have met the requirement set by the commission. But that despite that, NEC now recommended 6 out of these 13 political associations for registration. But the Armed Forces Ruling Council under Ibrahim Babangida decided not to register any of the political parties because it said they were not truly national political parties. And instead now said, though, what we are going to do is that we are going to decree 2 political parties into existence. We are now going to have 2 political parties. And that government was going to be responsible for writing the manifesto of the political parties. Government was going to be responsible for writing the constitution of the political parties. Government was going to design symbols of the political parties. Government was going to build party secretariat for those political parties. And so we now have the emergence of 2 political parties, the Social Democratic Party and the National Republican Conventions. Social Democratic Party was meant to be a little to the left of the center. Those are the ideologies. Whereas National Republican Convention was to be a little to the right of the center. So, and that was what led to the emergence of the political parties. The fact that the politicians have not learned their lesson, the fact that most of the political parties that were emerging were still based on sentiment, were not national political parties, the religion and ethnicity were still playing a major role. So there was need to jettison all of them and so have a national political parties that will not be proliferated. No, the idea behind having these 2 political parties then was that once we have a government, once we have government-registered political parties, there won't be founder, there won't be funder. Everybody will be joiners, everybody will be members. But eventually it didn't work out that way because those who move from the different political associations just move in their numbers into the registered political parties and they dominated those political parties.
It was in this light that Anthony Enahoro, the tireless social fighter, said, "My judgment of the 2 bodies is that they are military government parastatals being paraded as political parties for the benefit of the outside world." To General Obasanjo, he believed that those who call the 2 governments created parties, parastatals have even been generals. Parastatals at least have effective and accountable chief executives who can enforce order and discipline. The same cannot be said of the government-created parties. And yet, they are the vehicle through which it is hoped that a stable democracy will be nurtured. These barrages of criticisms did not in any way deter Babangida and his cohorts from marching on. Instead, the government continued to convince Nigerians that the end will justify the means and that skeptics will be put to shame when the program will come to the desired conclusion. The National Electoral Commission announced of September 21st, 1990, that the open ballot system will be used for the local government elections scheduled for December 8, 1990. The elections were held as scheduled, while due to the creation of additional 136 new local government councils in September 1991, and other local government elections were held on November 23, 1991. Gubernatorial elections were equally held nationwide on December 14, 1991, and the elected governors were sworn in on January 1, 1992. The National Assembly elections were held on the 14th of July, 1992. What remained was the presidential election, which incidentally many keen watchers of the Babangida transition politics had argued would never come to be, as the country's self-styled military president was seen as harboring a secret agenda of self-secession. The NEC divided the country into 6 zones for staggered presidential primaries using the option A4 method, which entailed organizing the primaries through a series of elections from the ward, local government, and states to the national levels. The primaries took place between August and September 1992 and, as expected, were characterized by noticeable irregularities. The president, in reaction to these irregularities and calls by the defeated candidates, cancelled the primaries and banned the 23 aspirants who took part in the primaries from taking part in the transition program.
It is true that the presidential election was generally seen to be free, fair, and peaceful. However, there was in fact a huge array of election malpractices virtually in all the states of the Federation before the actual vote.
He also went ahead to dissolve the executive committees of the two parties and appointed caretaker committees in their place. The handover date was also extended to August 27, 1993, and new primaries were to be organized. In the new primaries, Babangida's close personal friends MKO Abiola and Bashir Tofa emerged. The presidential elections were finally held on June 12, 1993, after some clandestine attempts by groups like the Association for Better Nigeria, headed by Ato Nzeribe, to stop it. Unfortunately, the election, which was adjudged the freest and most peaceful election in Nigeria's history, was annulled by General Babangida on the 23rd of June 1993 for sundry reasons, ranging from judicial anarchy to security reports about the candidates, but apparently in a self-succession plot. The transition, which has got billions of naira, has failed.
An election was conducted. All the results came in. As a matter of fact, when they were contemplating annulling it, the only state which is to come was Taraba. And eventually it came. The election was concluded. They consider it the fairest, the best election that has ever been held in Nigeria. But unfortunately, the military junta then decided, for whatever reasons, to annul it.
If you look at, or if you have perused literature, you look at the development that happened between June 12, when the result was announced, the election was held, and thereafter, until the emergence of General Sani Abacha, you will discover that Babangida gave different reasons for the annulment of June 12, 1993 election. No, when the Tunde Kairabo, who issued a task statement, was the chief press secretary then, that the election had been annulled, results announcement should be suspended. What was stated was that NEC did not comply with court order to stop the election. That when ABN and other anti-democratic forces went to court and asked that the election should not go on, NEC flouted that order and decided to continue with the election. That was a reason. By the time the result was announced and was suspended midway, and that generated crisis, generated uproar and protests and the rest, Babangida came up with different reasons. One was that the person who won, who was leading, because the result were not fully announced, it was a public knowledge that Chief Emeka Abiola won the election, was that the person was not acceptable to the military. That and military as presented in this situation is the military as a constituency. In other words, the Nigerian military, not the leaders. But the truth is that the leaders, Babangida and his cohort in power, were apparently not comfortable with Abiola, even though he was their friend, even though he had wined and dined with them, and so on and so forth. They had ruled together. They were not comfortable with him, and so they were apparently looking at what would not become of them in the post-military era or in the Abiola presidency. That's another dimension of their annulment. Part of the argument that was also raised was the fact that there will be conflict of interest. What do they mean by that? That government was owing Abiola's company, ITT, to the tune of $200 million. And that if he were to become president now, won't there be a conflict of interest? Will he not be interested in paying himself? Or would the economy not be jeopardized by the fact that the state was indebted to someone who was to take over by the reins of government? Part of the excuses that were also used was the fact that the election was heavily monetized, that there was tremendous negative use of money. And so, right from the primaries to the real election, and so the contest was not really fair. That it was the winners emerged under heavy financial inducement, and that the arrangement that produced that kind of leader, or those that threw up those kind of leaders, could not be sustained, and as a result, the election had to be annulled.
General Babangida wanted to organize another presidential election, which apparently will entail yet another postponement of the handover date. This time, Nigerians told him in very clear terms that they were not ready for another rigmarole in an endless transition. Even his military constituency told him that his time was up, as they could no longer guarantee his safety. Apparently confused on the way out of the quagmire, which Nigerians labeled the June 12 political impasse, Babangida hurriedly installed an interim national government, headed by Chief Ernest Shonekan, and left Aso Rock on the 26th of August 1993 in a hurry like a defeated general. The master dribbler has dribbled himself. He had thus reaped the fruit of 8 years of deceit and a dubious transition to nowhere, leaving the flanks open for his longtime friend and fellow quest, General Sani Abacha, to take over and presided over the affairs of the country in the regalia of a full-blown dictatorship. Perhaps S.E. Finer had prophesied about Babangida and his transition when he wrote in his popular book, The Man on Horseback, in 1962. Those armed forces that have tried to disengage from politics have had to hasten back as soon as the condemned political enemies came within sight of regaining power, while those that have elected to remain and rule have been ejected only by popular revolt or by further military revolt of their own malcontent. In most cases, the military that have intervened in politics are in a dilemma. Whether their rule be indirect or whether it be direct, they cannot withdraw from rulership, nor can they fully legitimize it. They can neither stay nor go. Between 1993 and July 7, 1994, Nigeria was run not so much as a country, but as a personal fiefdom. Billions of dollars were siphoned off into overseas bank accounts controlled by Abacha, his families or his cronies, while the masses simmered in anger at their deepening poverty. Literally, millions of Nigerians had fled into economic and political exile. Newspapers were shut down and trade unions were banned, while human rights activists, journalists, intellectuals and opponents, imaginary and real, were jailed or, in a few cases, eliminated by state-sponsored death squads. Among the victims were the Ogoni rights activist and playwright Ken Saro-Wiwa, who had been hanged, and retired General Shehu Musa Yaradua, a political power broker who had died after receiving a mysterious ejection in prison. The leading political figures of the day were held incommunicado. They included Chief Moshood Abiola, who was arrested for treasonable felony on June 11, 1994, over his declaration of a government of national unity at Ekpetedo. General Olusegun Obasanjo, the only soldier who had ever handed power to an elected civilian as at that time, was also incarcerated. Nigeria, many feared, will explode into a civil war that could spark a humanitarian disaster. One of the elder statesmen who felt the direct brunt of the repressive policy of the military regime and spent 20 months in detention recounts his experience during the trial.
So that was how I started my 20 months of detention under Abacha. So my wife returned home. Of course, we'll imagine she was in a terrible state. And so I was taken to a cell, overcrowded cell, and I didn't know where I was. I was stunned, really, because all my life I've served the country. I've done my very best to be honest, to demonstrate integrity and commitment to the Nigerian cause. I could not believe that anything could ever bring me into detention. That detention could be my reward for all the hard work I put in, for all the integrity, for all the self-denial which we went through to maintain the reputation. And so I began my detention. That was on the 9th of January, 1997. Earlier that day, I was given a very long and meaningless form to fill. I was asked to state the name of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, the mother of my father, the father of my mother. A lot of idiotic nonsense. So I filled the forms. They asked me, have you ever been abroad? If so, to which country? What was the reason for your going abroad? With whom did you go? Did you go alone? If you went with somebody, why did you go with him? All kinds of meaningless questions. I filled the forms. That was all I did in 20 months. They took the paper from me, they chucked me to the detention. Until March 12, early in the morning, about 5 a.m., I was woken up and told that my IPO, meaning my investigating police officer, was taking me somewhere. And I should get dressed, and I did. I was taken to a pickup, which was waiting with 2 armed policemen inside the vehicle. The only other person was my now late friend, Dr. Frederick Faseun, who was also a detainee like myself. So the 2 of us were then taken out of Alagbon. I thought we were taken to the execution range because nobody told me about anything. Since I was dumped there, nobody asked me any question. So I thought, well, it was time to go and pay the supreme price. So be it. So they took us from Alagbon in Ikoyi through Lagos Island, across the bridge to Yaba, all the way to Ikeja. We wound up at a magistrate court behind the police college, Ikeja, one of the remotest and decrepit magistrate court I have ever seen. They didn't take us to the magistrate court at Tinubu Square, nor the one at Yaba. They took us to a very remote and decrepit magistrate court at the back, in the backwood somewhere, behind the police college, Ikeja. My suspicion was that they did that to avoid publicity. Because they thought if the press knew we were being taken to court, there'd be a huge crowd, and that might interfere with their plans. So that's my guess. And but fortunately, the information got to me just before we left Alagbon, and I was able to send a message to my PA to get the press to meet me at the magistrate court. So when we got there, what they were trying to avoid had happened. There was a huge crowd of pressmen, journalists, cameramen waiting for us. When we got there, they didn't know what to do. They stopped. They did not want to go into the court. They couldn't want to go back. But finally, they took us into the court. And there they sat us down, they arraigned us, and charged us with treason. Of course, I was asked when I was guilty. They said I had met in diverse places and dates, on diverse dates, with some people I had never seen before was in court. They said I had been meeting with them, planning to overthrow the government of Nigeria. I laughed. I thought it was funny. They said, guilty. I said, how can I be guilty? I've never met any of these people before. I've always worked to uphold the Nigerian state, not to pull it down. I said, I knew nothing about it. They asked me 3 times, I said, not guilty. Fortunately, this is very important, they did not let us know we were being taken to court. So we had no chance to arrange our defense. However, God is smarter than them. In that courtroom was Femi Falana. He had come for another matter. So when he saw me and Fasim, he said, Egbon, why need to send for us? Me and Gani. We told him we were not told we are being taken to court. He said, okay, we appear for you. I will appear for you. Ladies and gentlemen, if I had been given advance notice that I was being taken to court for treason, and I was allowed to arrange defense, those are the very people I would have arranged. Femi Falana and Gani Fawehinmi. They did not tell us they want to deny us defense, but God arranged defense, and Falana was waiting for me in that courtroom. So he took up the case and battled them for about an hour. You know what happened next? Gani Fawehinmi came into the courtroom. Miracle? I would say yes. People say miracles don't happen anymore. They happen. To me, that was a miracle. So to me, that was a modern day miracle, that Femi Falana and Gani Fawehinmi, who did not know were being taken to court, and who are the very people we would have hired if I had been given advance information, the same people met us in that court. I believe God arranged that event. And so the two of them battled the magistrate and the prosecutors until finally they returned us to Alagbon, where we came from. They made an attempt to have us sent elsewhere for detention, but they said no, that the magistrate court has no jurisdiction, no competence to try or even listen to a case of treason. But treason is the highest crime on the statute book. If you are charged with treason and you are found guilty, the punishment is death. There's no option of fine or imprisonment. Our Papa Awolowo was tried for treasonable felony. Felony that resembled treason, not the full-fledged, undiluted treason for which we were charged. In other words, the punishment for our charge was death. So I was being tried for my life. And yet I was not even allowed to know that I was going to be tried. But God arranged our defense, and the two lawyers we'll have hired arrived in court, fought our case, and prevented the court from sending us anywhere else but Alagbon. And I want to say from that day until the 20th, until we left detention on the 20th, I believe, of August 1998, when Abacha died, nobody asked us any question about any crime anymore. Clearly, therefore, the whole thing was a kangaroo trial designed to satisfy the international community that was agitating for our release. Some international foreign governments said they should release us, that they knew we had committed no crime. And so to do, quote unquote, all that was needful, they took us to court. They said, we are charged for treason, we are being held for treason. Because before that, they didn't tell the world why they were holding us. They now told the world, we are being held for treason, for trying to overthrow the government of Nigeria. I, a civilian, lawyer, civil servant throughout my life, that didn't have no knife, I was charged with trying to overthrow the government that I served all my life.
Although many other statesmen experienced comparable or worse fate, activities such as meetings and rallies against the incumbent government attracted more prisoners and even the instant death of the culprits.
There were many. For example, Shivaji Adibanjo was arrested. Dr. Okurumu was arrested. Majorly, they are Afenifere people. For a period, I was arrested in Ondo here. Chief Alai was arrested. Bolaigi was arrested. All top-notchers of Afenifere were arrested. As a matter of fact, they made an attempt to arrest the late Pahajashi. In fact, he was detained at our prison for for a while, our police station, before he was released. There were a lot of people that were arrested. I can name many. You know, so it is enough. I mean, it is good to arrest, but what was worse was killing. So the arrest went on for a while, and part of the Nadeko people formed Radio Kujirat, which was transmitting from abroad, and it made the opposition so tough for the government. It was the fight till Abacha died.
I've mentioned Dr. Frederick Fassem, who were in the same detention center. We've been very good friends before then, and being put in the same detention brought us much closer. Before he came to Alagbon, he had been detained in a detention center in Ikoyi Cemetery. You know, there's a detention center in Ikoyi Cemetery. Yes, Fassem was there. We were there together until the very end. There were others who were there for other reasons, but the two of us were clearly there for the role we were playing in saying that whoever won an election must govern, that nobody should have the power to overrule the people of Nigeria. Nobody. And that was our crime. There was another person there who is not as well known as myself. He was Captain Moshood Adekunle Raji. He was also a detainee in Alagbon. We met in Alagbon. When I was in Alagbon, he was detailed to be looking after me, like my detention PA. He's my PA till today, more than 20 years later. His story was that he was in the Nigerian army, and when Babangida retired, he was retired. I think he said he worked closely with Babangida, and that the convention or practice in the army is to retire people who have worked too closely with people in power. So he was a civilian, and he said he wrote a letter addressed to the American Secretary of State in Washington, urging the American government through him to intervene in the Nigerian situation and rescue us from Abacha. It was, in my view, foolish to have given that letter to a friend of his who was going to London with the request that he should post the letter from London to Washington. When that friend of his got to Ikeja Airport, in those days everybody was thoroughly searched. When he was searched, they found a letter written by a Nigerian to the American Secretary of State. The security people must have wondered, who is this? What business has he got with the Secretary of State? So they opened the letter and read it. And they found it was Raji, Captain Raji, who wrote it. So they went and looked for him in Ibadan. They grabbed him and took him to Abuja, put in a detention in Abuja for some time. As a military person, of course, they took a very serious view of his letter, and then later they brought him to Alagbon, which was where we met. And we were there until Abacha died. We left Alagbon the same night that the rest of us were allowed to go home. There were others who were detained in other centers, like Ayo Padokun was arrested before us and detained, I believe, in Kuje prison in Abuja. There were others who were detained earlier for more shorter periods like Papa Adesanya, the leader of Afenifere, Chief Adebanjo, and Alhaji Ganiu Daudu. These three were arrested and locked up at Ikoyi police station. I was still free then. I was living in Ikoyi, so I was going there regularly to see them. Let me tell you a story. The very evening, the first time I went to visit them in the evening, they were allowed to talk with me, but after some time they said, "Sir, you have to go." So they said, I asked them to get up and go back into the detention. When the door was slammed behind them, I cried. I didn't know my own detention was yet to come.
Again, in the 22 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria's history, June 12 election is still said to be the freest and fairest. Many recount the reasons for the belief.
The June 12 is like a cosmetic project, or like when a lady goes into the mirror and put powder on his face and makeup artist. It doesn't add to anything. If it adds to anything at all, it adds to the fact that June 12 was a well-conducted election. But it doesn't change anything.
Well, the atmosphere of election, I wasn't really grown in 1993 when the elections happened in June 12. But I've been privileged to have read about, the various literatures that have spoken about June 12. So in terms of atmosphere, I can't say precisely what the atmosphere was like with respect to the election. But, I know for a fact that, Nigerians still keep referring to June 12 as the most transparent election that has ever happened in this country, especially because it was a Muslim ticket, then MK Abiola and Alhaji Tofa. I remember, I was a little boy, but I remember, also the various campaigns, the jingles, on television, at that time. Though young as I was, I had interest in politics, so I could have, I can imagine some of those things right now. But in terms of the election proper, then I think I was still in my village in Ikom, or in my town in Ikom, so I can't really say for exact, you understand, how the atmosphere was, because the center of activities and theater of the election was more or less in the southwest in Lagos, so. But generally, I think that, people were excited because of the reference that people still make, to that election, and the fact that Nigeria almost missed it, at the time.
The election was free and fair. Then the hope of people was high, but it was dashed by the military. And up till now, I doubt if we've had any election like that, or candidates with that kind of popularity, political popularity, like we had in the 90s. So the June 12 has remained, has remained a landmark in the history of Nigeria, and it will remain so. Okay. And that particular event, annulment of that election, has remained a ghost.
The June 12, 1993 presidential election remains a watershed in the history of Nigeria. Nearly 3 decades after the annulment, the Nigerian citizens remember the sad tale of the past. They remember the crisis, the pains, the agonies, the tears, the killings, the deaths, the chains of events that followed the annulment of that election, and they will never forget the price Nigeria has paid for this mistake in the last 28 years. As the country stands still in remembrance of June 12, let us be reminded that the trouble of June 12, 1993 will continue to haunt us until we come to terms with what transpired in those years of locust. June 12, 1993 will continue to remind us of how the federal military government unleashed the full weight of the government on harmless citizens and released the instrumentality of state-powered and machinery to destroy late Chief Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, his wife Kudirat Abiola, his business empire, and nearly 5,000 other Nigerians between 1993 and 1998. Despite the turbulence and imbalance in the Nigerian democratic system of the previous 28 years, the belief that the world's democratic government is better than a Benin military regime has kept the citizens hopeful.